This demo will show how we can add Spring functionality to an existing web application. This web application happens to be in struts. We're going to set up a database. We see that we're doing a Spring struts project setup here. So again, I saved you time of watching me do mundane stuff here, but I'm going to create a project here, new project. It's going to be just a regular Java project, or actually a regular project would do, but I'm going to leave it as a Java project. And we're going to call it DB admin because we're going to control our database this way. And one of the things we want to do with this is right click on it, and we want to add Apache Derby nature. This can only be done if you follow the instructions in the tutorial section, and what that essentially has us do is it has us take a few zip files, unzip them to create folders inside of Eclipse's install plugins folder. And we have then three. I'll show you briefly what that looks like. Go to computer. I happen to go into Tools, Eclipse. That's my installation of Eclipse, and there's a plugins folder. If you open the plugins folder, you'll see that we've created three folders within that. These three: Derby Core, Derby Plugin Doc, and Derby UI. Once you've done that, and once those folders are there, if you restart Eclipse, or you might have to restart Eclipse with a clean option, -clean, and Eclipse will rescan that plugins folder and add this to the user interface. Okay, and so once we've done that, we can set up the database. If you right-click on this particular DB admin, now that we've added the Derby nature, we can now go into properties, and we also see that there's an Apache Derby property in there. And you can set where, for example, the database files should go and so forth. I don't mind putting them in DB admin, although I wouldn't mind just putting basically in here. I mean, this is just my way of doing it. DB. I don't want to say DB file, let's call it DB image. Okay. And so within the DB admin, we're going to see some data files thrown into DB image. Otherwise, we're going to end up seeing a lot of metadata files and such. And what we want to do with DB admin is we want to import some files from our project. In my particular case, since I've got so much stuff on here, I have a different name for these folders, but yours is just going to be called Student Work. Mine's called Student Work Rich Interfaces. If you start with the Derby folder, we want to import all these SQL scripts, and now we have them available to us. If we now right-click on DB admin and don't say Run As for any of these, okay? We want to go to Apache Derby and start the server. We could also open up an interactive SQL window. So that window always pops up to let us know that the instruction got sent to the server. As soon as you see, started and ready to accept connections on 1527, then you're good. The problems that could occur here are if there's already another image of the database running and taking up that port, then you might have problems. I'm also going to close that, and that we don't need it. And so what we want to do is we want to run the script create struts JSF. Okay, if you want to double click on it and look what's inside, we see that it creates a whole bunch of tables after dropping them first. So this create DB struts resets the database by dropping all these views and tables and then recreating them as needed. And then we also have pop DB struts JSF right there, which means populate. So it populates data into these tables. So we see all these various DVDs and so forth. Okay, so all we're going to do now is create DB struts JSF. Right click on here. Remember, don't say Run As. Go to Apache Derby, run SQL script using IJ, connects to the database and so forth, and view that to make sure it looks good. Okay, so that's actually good. We see errors, but that's fine. The does not exist is basically saying that there's no table in this particular schema, so there's nothing to delete. So that's fine because this is the first time through. So now let's populate this table. or populate these tables. And we see that everything here is successful. One row inserted, updated, and so forth. If we were to rerun create DB struts, just to clear everything out, go to Apache Derby, rerun, and now you see that some of these tables don't exist, but at least the schema existed. Okay, so just don't worry about certain kinds of errors. If it's the first time through a database instance, obviously certain instances won't exist. And the connection string here, where it says create equals true, it'll create it as needed. Okay, so I'm going to repopulate the database. Apache Derby. Now, the main reason I'm showing this to you is because every time you make a change to the database via the application, you're going to have to reset the database. Okay, so that's essentially what we're doing. Now, remember, we're dealing with the DB struts JSF database, not these other ones. Okay, so moving forward, we want to turn our attention to what we have in the actual struts application. Now, when we covered this earlier, we want to notice that, for example, that there are different views here. We started with index.html, and we're going to have a product list JSP. This is one of our views. And one of the things that we are pointing out in struts is that we don't write servlets so much. We essentially create controller components that are called from the main servlet. And the main reason for that is if we were to write a servlet using our own our own homegrown model view controller, then every form would submit to a specific servlet, which would have to be mapped in WebXML using the regular mappings for servlets. And every servlet would have to do, the first part of what every servlet would have to do would be identical. It would have to take the form data that's coming in from the form. It would have to read the parameters from that form. It would have to instantiate a form bean. It would have to populate the form bean. It would have to validate the form bean. It would have to decide if the validation failed to go back to the JSP from whence it came with the form bean in tow, and so forth and so on. And every servlet, the first half or two-thirds of every servlet, or significant portion of the beginning, maybe depending on however big the servlet is going to have to be the same repetitive stuff. And so what they've done is they've taken that servlet functionality and just made it automatic using introspection and using some simple wiring and configuration that now, instead of appearing in WebXML as being a regular servlet mapping, we just get the one servlet mapping of asterisk going to this strut servlet, this dispatcher servlet, and all of the other mappings for your application, which map views, such as this product list.jsp, and associating them with the correct action handler and associating with the correct possible exits from that action, and associating it with the proper transfer objects and so forth, these backing beans or these form beans, if you will. All that is just associated with an XML file so that you don't have to custom code it in a servlet. So all we have to do is put all the custom code in DVD action, and this is just an implementation of the action class. Let's open this up and see what we have in here. I'm going to fold these comments. We see here that search DVD action extends action. Now action here is a org Apache struts action. Okay, I like to call it an action handler because this doesn't represent the action itself. The action itself is a conceptual thing. This represents the custom handler for a particular action. The action itself is codified in the URL. Let's take a look at index.html briefly, and we see here that this form that it's basically a search form. Actually, let me open index.html in the web page editor, so that we can see a split screen. And we see that this comes up with basically just search for DVD's name. It's just a simple form. That there is a form, okay? And it has one field, right? And that's going to be criteria. Okay, name equals text. Name equals criteria, type equals text. It's a text field and so forth. And then we have a submit button. Okay, name is go. And the main thing I was pointing out to you is this is the name of the action, search. And we codify that by calling it search.do, which indicates it as an action. which causes it to be intercepted by the struts dispatcher servlet. If you go to webinf web.xml, anything.do right there, let me just highlight that mapping, is going to go to the action servlet, which is specified right there. The action servlet, this is the class action servlet that's supplied to us, and then we have two init params. One is a param called application, which we point to application resources, and the other one, the other init param, is the location of the config file, which is strutsconfig.xml, which we'll get to in a moment. And then load on startup one. We don't want this large servlet to slow down the first request coming to our application. Okay, and so that's really the action. Search is the action. If we go to our action handler, here's our execute method. So this particular action has been created in such a way that it's just a straight struts application. It does not rely on Spring. So we're going to add the necessary changes to make sure that Spring can be used to configure this application and so forth. Now, I would normally invoke what we have here, but this particular setup is such that nothing will work until we get our configuration working. We could, switch over to Java EE here, view, and go into the server and launch something. You notice that all my stuff closed as soon as I switched to Java EE perspective. So what we do see, though, is that when we look at this search DVD action, it's been configured to run in an application environment of struts without Spring, in play. So we have to add some stuff. We need to define an instance field of type DVD business object to be injected via the setter method that we're going to create, and then that allows the Spring container to configure our application for us. Now, if we're going to really truly get a lot of benefit from Spring, as we mentioned in the lecture portion, the slides, instead of extending action, we have to extend a different base class, one that is Spring aware. And mainly, we need it to be aware of the web application context. Now, the easiest thing to do here is use the action support class. So I want to put my cursor right there and do Control Space and type in SU action support. See, Org Spring Framework Web Struts. It comes from the Spring Framework, and it's specific to web applications, more specifically struts, and that's the guy we want. And that means we're not going to extend action anymore. I'm going to Control/that so that we don't end up seeing that in the warnings list. And by extending action support, we actually inherit some really useful methods that become part of our utility method set. So basically, now that we're extending this, our actual action class is going to be aware now of the web application context that is basically managing our entire environment, basically from within Spring. So once that's the case, we are going to want Spring to inject the dependency into our particular action handler. So we want to, I'm going to do Control Space DVDBO. We want to declare a local, we want to declare an instance variable to be able to hold a reference to that, and we want it to be injectable. So, we create now a setter method, set DVD BO. I just decided that because of the way I want that to read. This doesn't really matter, to be honest. What matters is the name of the method. The name of the attribute makes no difference whatsoever. At least not in terms of the framework anyway. It may matter to us for coding practices and so forth. Or coding standards anyway, or coding conventions. Okay, there we go. So that's just a normal setter. And we're not going to call this setter. Okay, the Spring framework, the environment, the web application context is going to call this. And it's going to be called at runtime, but in the special portion of runtime, the initial part of runtime, which we like to call configuration time. So it's technically runtime. It's after compile time, after the application has been invoked, but before the application proper is given a chance to run. So any code other than configuration doesn't get a chance to run until all this is done. So now that we're getting this reference from an external source, we need to make sure that we are moving out the line of code. There we go. There's a line of code. So oftentimes when we do this, when we configure for Spring, we have to kind of undo certain things that existed before. And in this case, in execute, we see that we were creating a DVD business object explicitly using new, which was, number one, it was okay, I suppose, to do that, but it's hard to configure. You have to go into this method of this class to change the configuration, if at all, unless, of course, you push stuff out to a factory class. But that's essentially what Spring is. So we have to remove this line. I'm going to comment that, Control/. And now the beauty is not only can we configure everything from within Spring, but we're also going to get this DVD-BO as a singleton. So we're not going to create new instances every time there's an execute. I'm sorry, every time there's a new thread of execute. Okay, so every time execute was called, you were creating a new DVD-BO, and it was a local variable, and you're not passing it out. So then it would throw it away, and every time you'd call execute again, you'd create a new object and throw it away. So every single time this action was performed, you would create a brand new instance of DVD-BO, which is very wasteful. You end up with a lot more garbage collection than really is necessary, which would have prompted us to, at a minimum, follow the factory pattern for making, factory pattern combined with singleton to make sure that we're always using the same business object if that's what we need, is a, kind of a global singleton. But that's, in this case, this is getting that reference. Currently, if you notice, if you left this alone, the DVD-BO, I have to open these back up since we switched perspectives. We go into Java Resources, DVD-BO, part of the model. This is essentially a mocked version. Okay, so instead of getting this particular instance, we're going to get one coming in from Spring. Now, we're going to use the same class or an instance of the same class, but the difference is we are going to get rid of this implementation, as this shows, and we're going to actually get data from a database. This is currently mocked out just so we can build an application and see it run with the minimum amount of effort. And then we go, once we get all of our wiring done, get our application working, then we can go back and substitute in the correct implementations. An alternative approach would have been to create different implementations of a particular interface and swap out implementations using Spring to configure. But in any case, now that we've made our change to here, we're going to get an instance of this class configured by Spring. So we don't have to worry about going deep into the code to change configuration, because frankly that's very tedious and very error prone. So let's do that right now. We follow along with this dependency injection. Okay, we got this dependency injected. Let's work our way backwards to dependency injected instance of that. So let's go to DVD-BO, business object, and we're going to do something very similar. We also have to declare an instance variable. This time it'll be of DVD-DAO, data access object. Here's the interface for that. And so this will be some instance that implements that. And let's create an appropriate setter method for it. You have to be very careful with the setter name to make sure that the property that it is being assumed is named as expected based on decapitalization rules. So public, let's at minimum remember what that is. Void DVD DAO. And a typical setter, just basically takes that value. If we were really to do a super robust job, we would put, we would catch null pointer exceptions and whatnot in here. So that somebody, if they set it to null, generally that's not what we would ever use the dependency injection for, to clear it out. So therefore, if we catch it and throw the exception for ourselves so that we have a much easier time finding out when configuration is wrong, then all the better. Once again, because we're now injecting this reference, the reference that we're creating here, we don't want. Actually, that's not the only thing we have to get rid of. We have to get rid of all this. We really should get rid of all this mocked stuff in general. And instead, we're going to use the DVD DAO, the data access object, to do the work for us. So this .dvd DAO, if we go into the DVD DAO, well, we could look inside here if we want to look at the methods. But implementation is going to have search products by name. So search products by name, given a string, that would be this local variable here, name. And let's take another look at the return type designator, returns collection, which is exactly what this was returning. Actually, this returns a collection, and more specifically, I suppose we hit here and hit F3 to jump into that code. It doesn't really describe anything, so that doesn't help us. We go back to where we were. The implementation is what we really care about. So let's take a look at the DVD DAO implementation, impl, and see what this says. And we see that this returns a list of DVD transfer objects. Okay? So if you look back here, this says returns a collection. We know that it's going to return a list of DVD transfer objects. So going back to here, we know that this is correct. That's what we're expecting, and so we're going to return this collection. This yellow underscore is basically saying, hey, this is a raw type. You might want to be more specific. I'm going to leave that as a suggestion for improvement later. For now, we're just going to keep going, because this isn't really the focus of this lab. The focus of this lab is to configure things from within Spring. We could always refactor this, and there are actually multiple refactorings we could do here to make this even more, Spring-like and configurable and so forth. So now let's go back to DVD DAO impl. This class should be fine as is. Let me just see what the yes, this is again checked and all of that. Let me just add suppress warnings just to get that out of our way. I'm going to hit Control S to save to get rid of all of that stuff in the left edge, because I don't want to obscure any real errors. So for now, I'm going to suppress warnings. And what I could do is apply type safety as needed, just so I can remember to go back to it and as a to-do list. Let's take a closer look at this. What this is really doing is this is going to the Hibernate layer, essentially, using something called a Hibernate template, which is basically like a pre-made semi-filled component. We're going to execute a find, and we're creating a brand new callback here. This is an inline anonymous inner class of type Hibernate callback, and do in Hibernate create query, select all objects from DVD TO where title like name. So this is going to return an entire list of DVD transfer objects, DVD TOs, based on the name, a match. That's So that's literally what it's doing. Search products by name. It's actually going to the Hibernate layer, though, and getting these names from the database. So we just wanted to look at that so we understood what's happening there. So now let's go to web.xml, web content, webinf, web.xml. And we see a welcome file right there that I put in for you so that we can simply right-click on this application string Spring Struts and run it and immediately go to the right page, which is the search page. And within WebXML, we want to register a listener because this listener is very important for configuring. This is the sort of workaround, if you will, or this is the sort of way to trick a regular web application into getting configured by Spring. It's via this listener. So we need to add a listener. And essentially all we do for a listener is, all that's absolutely necessary is define the listener class. If you want to sort of cheat here, what I'm fond of doing is typing in the name of the class, which I know is context loader listener, and that way I can get an entire package name here because I'm using Eclipse to import this stuff. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to undo Control-Z until the file I'm working on no longer has changes. So I do Control-Y to redo the change and then Control-Z to undo all of my changes to that point that I know that I, in effect, have not done anything to that file. And I'm going to switch over it here and Control-V to paste it. Org Spring Framework Web Context Loader Listener. Make sure, though, that when you do the import that you read. This is kind of a cheat so that you don't have to memorize these package names. Two things. Number one, you really should memorize these package names sooner or later if you use these frameworks often. But even more importantly, number two, if you import one, look carefully at the name of the package of this object that you're, or this class that that you're grabbing, because oftentimes with things like context or things like connection, it's such a generic word that the last thing you want to do is pull in an object with the same class name or similar class name from a completely unrelated framework. That would be, catastrophic in terms of not being able to run your application. Now, since we're here, let's take a look at this init parameter. Here's the action servlet. Here's the init parameter that we care about. We're passing in config info into here, and what we have to note is what the name of that file is. It typically is strutsconfig.xml. Hey, but you got to verify these things. You can't always just assume people are going to follow the specifications or that things didn't get messed up and misspelled or accidentally edited and so forth. So I'm going to copy Control-C. I'm going to copy that name because we're going to make sure that we have that name for when we work with strutsconfig.xml in case either we have to create it or we have to verify that it's the correct name or that it, well, not that it's correct or incorrect, but that it matches the file that actually is in our configuration.